Gwen, what do you think the impact of COVID-19 is having on religion in terms of practice and belief?
I think there is a potential splintering happening, and speaking from Catholic tradition, which is partly where I live. I also live in a kind of interfaith community. But when I'm in my narrow band, I'm in the Catholic tradition. There's always been this dual nature to Catholicism, having a sort of sacramental, community-based, liturgical focus, going to church, going to mass. There's also been a strong private spiritual dimension of private prayer or mystical prayer. That is all completely invisible now. We've, at our parish, we've attempted to have the Facebook masks and masses and Facebook gatherings, but there's a silence now around that private practice, and also that broader sense that religious communities give of being a family, of being together. So I've had various impulses about, what about all the elderly people, all the people that are unconnected? It's all very well providing things online, but actually that's probably only a small proportion of people who can actually access it. How do we access our elderly? How do we support each other over the telephone or by notes? So I thought, well, yes, we could get a drive going, and we can write letters. We need to get telephone numbers from Father Sean, and then thinking, well, data protection. He's got to go to each of those people individually, get permission, share the data with us, which is an impossible workload. So actually, because we see each other normally and it hit suddenly, there's been no time to prepare backup ways of relating to each other and supporting, and no time for us to prepare ourselves for how do you rebirth that private personal spirituality of a prayer life that can't be mediated through the community. So yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned, much as governments have to have a preparedness thing and have enough face masks or whatever. We need to have our modes, both of interpersonal support and spiritual support, worked out before this hits again, or hits next time, or before we get another spike. So I think it's been a slight danger for us that everything, a danger to me personally is on the sort of liberal wing. There's a dangerous tendency for things to get mediated through priests. And now it's almost a necessity. We can't have that person-to-person contact unless we happen to have someone's phone number already. So again, everything is just getting routed through the priest on Facebook.
But is that being challenged now? In other words, is there a kind of, I don't know, anti-clericalism, if you like, or is it making a difference? Because it's not possible now for everything to go through the priest. It's almost like the grassroots development going on.
Yes, and where it's organized, I think it is working. So Catholic charity, so this is something Catholics often do quite well, social action, but that's because it pre-existed. So, for example, some of the Catholic charities are putting stuff out on Twitter. So, for example, we responded to a call from the Jesuit Refugee Service. We have lots of family Jesuit connections. I was vice principal at the Jesuit college, Heathrow College, and my husband was a headmaster at a Jesuit school. So we have lots of Jesuit connections. So the Jesuit Refugee Service put out a call for help for volunteers. So that's fine. That's already organized. So lay action, which has always been good in Catholicism, it's not been clerical excessively, has its pre-existing structures and it can operate well. I think on that interpersonal spiritual dimension, everything is being forced online or by private phone call. So I don't think we found the workarounds yet. Individuals may have, but not on an organized level. So there's that dilemma of not having things prepared in advance in terms of the infrastructure, the organization.
So maybe we are more attuned to what a pandemic or what social isolation means if it happens again. But are there other developments we touched on before we started recording on the areas of non-liturgical practice? Maybe you can say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, on a positive level, I think in terms of people's private, personal prayer lives, there are actually lots of existing resources and online things that people can find. And if people can be lured back called back, driven back to that sort of sense of a direct relationship with God and direct compassion for one another. One of my sort of optimistic moments would be about how we could actually rediscover, revalue, and appreciate newly that importance of that personal stream. And that's not an isolated thing, it's certainly not a selfish thing, but it's, in a sense, it's not kind of just lazily delegating to some other being the business of relating to God. And we'll just get it secondhand, you'll just give me what I need, and then, you know, we'll just click into that. And I hope also it will call into question how Catholics react to sacraments and the provision of it. I was reflecting, it's kind of ironic with the Catholic Church that this has happened after a controversy that hit last October, which was raised, it's raised periodically, but it was raised in a quite dramatic and visible way with people in the Amazon. And I don't mean the company, I mean the original place in Brazil, where it was pointed out that 85% of the Catholics in the Amazon probably could see a priest at most once a year. And there was a debate around that, and a debate about whether actually they should relax the current rules around celibacy and male priesthood. And it was very controversial and fell into this culture wars between conservative and liberal and pro and against Pope Francis. And the answer was no. And it's interesting that in that case, the rules trumped access, in a sense. Pre-existing rules of celibacy was deemed to be more important than sacramental access. It's a bit ironic now, because in America at the moment there have been some, to me, very disturbing movements in American Christianity, where pastors, some a small group, but some have also been Catholics, defying lockdown, defying stay-at-home rulings, defying bans on gatherings, and claiming some kind of exemption or exceptionalism, which disturbs me on a number of levels and seems to be actually very anti-biblical. But in those cases, suddenly attending church is more important, which wasn't the way that the conservative position went on that earlier question. So if it makes us rethink how authority works, who is sacred, how does God's grace come to us, and makes us rediscover our roots, I think that would be a brilliant thing. And I think maybe it'll drive us to think about what is resilience. That's not a very Catholic-y thing, possibly not a Christian-y thing. It's a government thing, isn't it? It's an unsexy word. It sounds very secular, sustainability and resilience. But actually, in terms of the endurance, what Muslims call sabr, the ability to just keep going and survive and endure, is actually much rated by saints, tends not to be highly rated nowadays in Christianity as a virtue. And we may discover that part of that resilience is having your spirituality bedded at home where you live, figuratively and literally.
Yes, I wanted to end our conversation with the question of home, because one of the challenges as well is not raised by the example of the Amazon Catholic, but raised by the example of the sanctity of a place, and that's no longer available, particularly for Christians who are so used to going to church, to attend Mass, and that's no longer possible. So I'm just wondering whether there's something that may come out of this about a theology of home, a liturgy of home. Is that possible, or is that just me from the outside sort of using in a way that is just impractical?
No, I think that's really important. I mean, it's very tempting. I'm going to now behave in a very stereotypical Christian way, sorry, but it strikes me as something that Jewish families, Jewish spiritual communities, Judaism, modern Judaism gets really well, and other religions often don't. That sacredness, community, prayer, celebration, observance can be rooted in the home. I think there's a particular issue for some Christians and Catholics that home is so often, when it's valued in a way that immediately makes people feel, makes women in particular feel a bit manipulated. Home is where you should stay and belong. So it gets wedded to a kind of conservative perspective that doesn't want women to go out. as it were, and be outside the home. And it's wedded to certain notions of what women's service, vocation, and love of life should consist in. It would be awfully good if we could rediscover that sense of the sacredness of home and the ability to be at home wherever you are, wherever you're locked down, so to speak. The theology of place is actually personally very important to me. I'm going to just alter my picture. That's my home. That's Hawaii, the island of Oahu. And there we have a very profound sense of the sacredness of place that I've often contrasted coming to Europe, as European philosophy is very good on thinking about time. It's not very good and history, and it's not very good at understanding our identity as rooted in place. Again, other traditions do this quite well. So that sense of sacredness of this place, this land, belonging to us. And I would want to see it grow into a theology of nature, because I think one lesson for us from COVID, it should be a lesson of humility for humanity, assuming that we're dominant, that we can dominate nature, that we're invulnerable to it, and learning to revalue nature, this place, the respect we need to have for it, how abuse will come back to destroy us, is maybe one of the positive things we just might get from this epidemic.
Gwen Griffith-Dickson, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed.